Good afternoon, everyone. Very good presentation, Melissa and Chris. I thought it was very insightful, and I think the rest of the audience did too. So I'll start with the lady, as we are gentlemen here in Kenya. You already alluded to it. One of the good things that Jared and his team have been able to do is convene all the major stakeholders. But it's still a challenge when you listen to Jared's story. What insights have you gained in the US, and how do you get Treasury, the central bank, private sector into a room and to have a good and candid conversation?
So it's interesting, we passed the law, the Dodd-Frank Act, after the financial crises, and somebody slipped in language, I kid you not, that said consumers have a right to their data, and a right to their financial data and their ability to share it. So it's been a very slow process. What is interesting about the interim is there's been a heck of a lot of innovation. There have been numerous fintechs who, because of the technology, have been able to access cash flow data and enable an entire ecosystem of other fintechs who have been providing credit. That has enabled the regulators to look and learn and probe. I would say from a FinReg Lab standpoint, because we are a team, many of us are ex-government and policy and regulatory people, we've been able to construct conversations and engage the regulators. They are motivated to do it because they know they need to look and learn, but to sit at the table formally as observers. There's no obligation, there's no, they're being specially advised by FinReg Lab. But as observers has enabled them to sit, and frankly, they have engaged with lots of questions. And so that sort of intermediary, we are a 501c3, a public mission organization, I think has been helpful, but we also have timed it well. We are focused on a topic that is so important and has such potential benefit to consumers and small businesses and their access to credit.
You're a private sector player, you are providing alternative data. I think the big question in the room is, are you competing with existing credit reference bureaus? And if so, how? And if you're not, what are you doing? Are you complementing, or what exactly is the type of business that you have, and what does it play in the ecosystem?
Juicy's Core has been in the market for 7 years. We are not a shell company. We are not trying to test the African market, or Kenya to be specific. We have been tried and tested. So what we're trying to say is we are not competing in any way with the bureau, because credit data is very important. So what we're trying to do is to complement that, as I mentioned earlier. So for us, we're looking on, because a lot of people have mentioned when they came here, it's about collaboration. The statistics are there. I think one of the panelists mentioned, and even as we've done our research, that 65%, I think this is from you, that 65% of the respondents did agree that if we use alternative data, then what it means is we'll be able to have a predictive score. For the fraud, it goes above without saying that the numbers are increasing, not only in Kenya alone, but globally. So what happens is, a lot of having worked in the bureau, is most of the institutions are using data to be able to come up with some criteria, especially matching criteria, to be able to say that somebody sent an email when they were doing the application on their phone, or a phone number, which we know very well. Maybe it will be a discussion with the MNOs in future, that if you don't use this in the next 3 or 6 months, and machine learning is not unique to us. It's something that it will be there, and it's still there in the future, that we can be able to have predictive pattern using artificial intelligence to be able to identify. So no way, and it's been proved, because for our company, we have seen the institutions, especially financial institutions, that have used both the bureau, as Kevin asked me, and our score, because it's just an algorithm where you can be able to have another parameter. which is our anti-fraud, or if you want fraud or risk, and then add it to the algorithm, and then make it more predictive. So it shows that it's able to increase by 10 plus. It means in terms of return of investment that a lot of customers are able to be, and people are arguing this in terms of financial inclusion, that people are able to participate. And for us, I feel that we should now start saying financial participation.
But actually having firms that are building scores on some of these alternative data that we're talking about. I mean, the US market is vast, as is Kenya, as is Africa, and the ability for that information to be available safely, for it to be used prudently, mindful of the market dynamics, offers opportunities. I think, you know, what we have come to realize, and I heard this in today's conversation, is are the behaviors, are the repayment activities positive as well as negative being reported in? And is there a sort of consistent system where understanding is a small business, a consumer loan stacking, or is there risk that you otherwise wouldn't know if there isn't that consistency of reporting? That feels like a separate aspect of an effective credit ecosystem.
Thank you for that. And just to stick with you, Melissa, one of the questions or conversations we had over lunch was there are all these different silos of data sitting in different value chains. And the example that was given at lunch was I'm a cement business, I have suppliers as a cement business. There's a lot of data because we've been interacting as two businesses for many years, and you've seen growth. There's orders, there's payments. What have you seen in the US that can sort of bring that alternative data into the mainstream data sets? Or how can we get that data to the lending companies to give those small businesses better credit facilities?
Sure. Some of the alternative data is still financial in nature. Include utility data and rent payment data. There are increasingly efforts, not just by fintechs, to be an intermediary to facilitate rental payment activity. And in the US, we have many landlords who are very sort of independent and disconnected. And so there have been efforts both by nonprofits, and increasingly we're even seeing some of the banks try to help to facilitate a data sharing infrastructure for that kind of dispersed information reported activity to be shared into credit decisioning. But it's complex, and it's also complex in the US because there may be implications of the reporting of that data, of rental data, or of utility data. And there are big and important questions about what does a borrower, a small business, or a consumer, what choices are they making if they're thinking my rent payment or my utility payment is going to show up on my credit record? Do they make decisions that may be advantageous to them? So there are sort of surrounding market context and consumer implications that I think also relate to the motivation of enabling that kind of data to be truly sort of plumbed in for credit decisions.
But do the businesses see the value of sharing that data? And has the experience of getting them to share that data been easy, or has it been pulling teeth?
It's been challenging, but I think increasingly, especially in our housing market, even the rental market, where there is steep competition, landlords are seeing the advantages of that kind of data repayment activity being part of a repository system that they themselves are able to leverage and benefit from. Exactly.
Chris, back to you. You're dealing with alternative data. We've got the Data Protection Act 2019. The Office of the Data Commissioner has been doing quite a bit of work engaging, particularly the digital financial services. What steps are you taking to ensure that you're, one, protecting third-party data, and two, what kind of policies do you have as Juicy Score that comply with the Data Protection Act?
Thank you so much, Kevin. For us, I need to emphasize that how our data that we're collecting is not personal data. it's non-personal data. This is through the GDPR, so we have all the compliances. But that said, what happens is when it comes to scoring, there's some conditions that we might require. And I know where we say to all the banks or financial institutions, they have their terms and conditions. And these terms and conditions, there are a lot of not even our data only. So the POCs that you've done is you just told the banks, because for example, an IP globally is due as non-personal data. But in Kenya, how the ODPC has been able to mention it is more of personal data. So we just put a clause into the terms and conditions, and then the customer actually complies by agreeing to the terms, and then we can be able to collect the data. But ultimately, I've shown you all the data outputs that we're talking about. We're talking about the device, the type of phone. So if you have an iPhone, a Samsung, Itel, I don't think that's personal data. But of course, to be more compliant, to make everyone comfortable, we are in talks, and of course, we'll be able to share a data dictionary for them to be able to see, and also we send this to banks to tell them that these are the data that we collect. The other thing, we do not store that data. For example, I can give you an example of a phone. So if your number is 0722123456, we do not pick the 6 last numbers, just for you to make you more comfortable, or an email. For us, it's about the pattern and what to be the artificial intelligence, what they can be able to do. But just to be more comfortable for us is we have the GDPR compliance, we get consent from the customer, we also produce the data that we get, and we do not store the data.
Face recognition. Some of us took our ID photos 40 years ago, so currently my banking app does not recognize this face. Because it's like the face that was drawn today. So how do you deal with that? Because, I think it's a bit of an issue.
Is that for me?
Just a couple of questions. I think the first one is about how do you evaluate, this model, this alternative data, its predictiveness, and also, creditworthiness assessment with the actual facts on the ground, or do you find any challenges regarding the actual practices regarding using the alternative data?
My colleague has just mentioned in the development one, we have said it to Mark, just to answer your second question, and then I'll go to your first question. And we also replicated that in Asia, a market that we feel has some form of similarity in terms of demography, behavior, access to credit. And we feel using our model that we have tested there, and we've seen how the economy has grown. And we're talking about India, which is a larger population, and we've managed to change the narrative. Because here, what we're trying to derive is a narrative. At the end of the day, it's the consumer. We want to, and I'm so sure the regulators are here, to be able to drive a narrative where the consumer can be able to have risk-based pricing. But the issue is that the financial institutions are saying that they do not have enough data to be able to profile. And that's where the alternative data is coming. So in terms of challenging, yes, the question of data privacy came through, but now we managed to secure based on the compliance and based on how individually or the company or you can be able to agree on the terms of it. But just to look at the score, initially how it started, for example, we are hoping that the financial institution, maybe where you said, can be able to start appreciating and using that particular score, not as a yes or no. So yes or no, I mean here that if you're listed, decline. And if you're not listed, approve. I think it's a challenge that I'm putting across for bankers to be able to extend it, to start using the score, and I believe in you, as my colleague, where we'll be able to change the narrative from blacklisting to risk. So you'll be told that go ahead, and if for example, you decline a loan, you will be told go work or go build on your score. So what that will do is the moment you use a bureau score, then what happens, it helps us put an alternative score that we have using alternative data, plugging into the matrix that the bank has, because we're already giving you an output of the score, and then it will be able to be more predictive. So it's just a narrative. The reason why we're here is for bankers to be able to change their methodology and appreciate scoring, and which the regulators and the CRBs are here to be able to push, and have for us to be able to have, which I think by now we agree that all these alternative data is very useful to make the score more predictive.
Thanks, Chris. Vanessa, do you have any?